Oh, hey everyone. We're going to get going, so if folks want to get a refreshment or whatever, you're welcome to it. Before we get started, let me tell you what's coming up over the next 3 months. So next month, Mark Pothier, Robbie Robinson, and Troy Finn of the Plymouth Independent are going to come and talk about that. We're hoping in January to have an update on the planning for the Holtec property. So the town has put out an RFP for a consultant to plan for that property. Of course, plans are kind of the idea of what we want to do. It's always zoning that kind of mandates what a developer can do, but that's good news that we are planning for that. In February, we're hoping to have the wastewater treatment, somebody from the CAC come and give us an update. We are actively working to get the Eel River watershed back up online, so hopefully we'll have that up and going. And before I introduce Kevin, Patty, do you want to say anything? Or not that you have to?
No, I don't really have a lot to say. I'm very interested in this topic. I think, there's a lot of questions people still have. I did invite the precinct chairs. I don't see any of them here, but because we are at town meeting, we have town meeting coming up, and this is, I think, a very important thing for the town to consider, at least to educate themselves on. So if you feel strongly about it, I would recommend you speak with your precinct chair and urge them to vote however you want to vote. I think they've heard a lot about it so far. I think everybody needs to keep an open mind. It's a little something different, but I think it's a good direction for us. So that's what I have to say. Oh, and there's cheese and crackers, and there's lemonade, and there's water, and there's snacks, so please help yourself.
All right.
And Kevin Canty, our select board member, is here to give us a nice presentation and answer your questions.
All right, thank you very much. So for those that don't know me, my name is Kevin Canty, the vice chair of the select board. So the Plymouth Land Bank it's technically a planning board article, but it's also on the fiscal year goals for the select board as well. So it's an initiative of both the planning board and the select board. And I'm just going to give you an overview that addresses it in broad strokes, talks about some of the provisions, some of the reasoning behind this, what it does, how it functions, some of the exemptions, and then I'll be available for questions at the end. There are a lot of questions that different people have, and I'll be here to answer any of those that you may have. For folks that are town meeting members, I will point out that this is Article 17 of the town meeting. It is on, if you have the report and recommendations book of the Advisory and Finance Committee, it starts on page 119, with the text of the special act. But for others, this presentation will hit the highlights, and then again, those questions and answers will be there to clear up any other issues that folks have. So without further ado, let's get started. So what would a land bank do to Plymouth? The land bank, this land bank proposal, is designed to provide a mechanism for buying land for the following uses. So it's looking to buy land for open space, which includes both passive and active recreation, conservation, aquifer protection, affordable housing at 60% area median income, as well as municipal uses, schools, wells, fire stations, etc. And it does so without raising taxes on residents. And you might say to yourself, well, that sounds like a pretty good deal. And I would say, I agree. And what it does is so there are other land banks in the Commonwealth. There's other land banks in the country as well. There have been 3 successful land banks in Massachusetts. There was one on Cape Cod that eventually got rolled into and sort of dissolved because the CPA and the community preservation committees that we have here in Plymouth and in other communities essentially became what that land bank was throughout Cape Cod. But Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard still have land banks. Their land banks are geared entirely towards open space, okay? They've over the years bought a lot of the open space. Basically, whenever a parcel comes up on Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket, particularly Nantucket, they're able to swoop in and purchase that in the interior of Nantucket Island for open space conservation purposes. We are looking to do more than just open space because we recognize that Plymouth, all three of these issues are related to the continuing growth of this community. Plymouth is the fastest growing community in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We are adding about 750 to 1,000 people a year to Plymouth at this current time. Some of them are going into new houses. Some of them are going into existing construction. But all of them would pay a transfer fee, which I'll get into later, when they come into the community. And that's why it doesn't raise any taxes on residents, because it's people coming in. We're essentially talking about it as if it's your initiation fee to the club of Plymouth. Now, we all live, I assume everyone in this room already lives in Plymouth. I live in Plymouth. We're already members of the club, so congratulations, you don't have to pay. But if someone else comes in, they have to, they're going to be asking for services, they're going to be adding to the community. So we're just looking for a 1% to 2% transfer fee on when they're purchasing their property, and we're going to use it for these three purposes. So open space, passive or active recreation, hiking trails, playgrounds, things of that nature, that would characterize that. I think people are generally familiar with that. Aquifer protection is particularly important. I think people generally know about that, but just in case people don't, we live over a sole source aquifer. It's a sole source aquifer because it is the single source of our drinking water in this community and other communities as well, but we're primarily concerned about Plymouth. Growth has the potential to threaten in the aggregate the quality of that water. If things were to get into that aquifer and compromise that water, taint that water in some way, that would be disastrous for Plymouth. So protecting the aquifer through strategic locations that are particularly vulnerable via open space is very important. Affordable housing at 60% median income, you might ask, what does that mean? So affordable housing is defined by the CPC and most other federal and state programs is generally at 80% area median income. Area median income is just what it means, the median income in that particular area. But the important thing is, this area that we are in is considered to be in the same area as Quincy, Cambridge, Boston, Braintree, places that have higher standards of living, higher wages, and we are lumped in that particular grouping because of the census and the Federal Census Bureau and the designation of places. So from Washington's perspective, we are very close to Cambridge. But from our perspective, I don't think many of us would consider us to be very close to Cambridge in the areas that matter. 60% is significantly more affordable than 80%. Could it be even better? Sure. But we're trying to make this, the CPC, for example, their baseline is 80% area median income for their affordable housing. So we're looking to make the affordable housing generated by this particular function just slightly more appealing, slightly more attractive, something that's actually closer to being affordable for people to actually live and work in Plymouth. Then municipal uses, schools, wells, fire stations, etc. As I said, we're gaining 750 to 1,000 people a year. Those are continuing to drain on services. We already know that we need to construct new schools in the near future. We need to construct new fire stations in the near future. There's talk about needing to replace or expand the police department in the next 10 years. You're seeing right now Cedarville Fire Station has a substation within it that's open some hours of the police department right now because of increased demand in the southern part of town. That's only going to continue to grow as this town continues to grow. And we want to tie the continued growth of this community to these further, to this by providing for this municipal use. And what's important is if we did say buy land for a school or for a fire station or a well, and it required the building of that fire station, all the land bank does is purchase the land underneath. The fire station would still need to be approved by town meeting, okay? This is just buying the land on the market when it becomes available and securing it for that potential purpose. But town meeting is still involved later in that process in building, let's say, the fire station. So there's still that provision there. As I said earlier, it would be funded by between 1% and 2% of the value of property that people are buying, and it's paid by the buyer. 1 and 2% is the goalpost. It's going to start at 2, but it can be adjusted down as far as 1 or anywhere in between. It could be like 1.75. We wanted to have that flexibility because what happens with this? This is a proposed piece of special legislation. If town meeting approves it, okay, it then goes to Beacon Hill, and the State House has to approve it. That's going to take between 18 months and 2 years to happen. Then it's going to come back to Plymouth. And members of the voting public here are going to have an opportunity to vote. Do you want this or not in a general election? So there's those 3 steps. So we want to have some flexibility to it. So let's say something like 2008 happened again, and it becomes more costly to transfer real estate. It becomes harder for people to buy a home or to get rid of a home if they need to get rid of a home. We want the commission to be able to adjust within those goalposts without having to completely change the act, without having to go through that 2-year process all from the beginning again, 2+ year. So that's why there's that flexibility there. And the more that land is sold in Plymouth, the more money we will have for these designated purposes. So again, it's tying it to the growth of the community, to the influx of people into this community. The more people come here, the more land is transferred, the more money will be in the land bank for these particular uses, and only for these particular uses. There are a number of exemptions to the land bank because we don't think a flat 2% or 1% or anything between with no exemptions would be fair. We think there are certain folks, certain circumstances that we don't want to have to pay those fees. We want to have to pay a reduced fee. But going over some of the notable exemptions, at a minimum, property sold for less than $350 or less is exempt with certain provisions that can be adjusted higher, but it can't be adjusted below. There are a number of provisions where $350,000 or less is a purchase price. You wouldn't pay on that particular piece of property. You would pay but you would if it were $355,000. You would pay on the whole $355,000. Okay, but in that situation, at a minimum, $350,000, they wouldn't pay on that. It can be adjusted upward, but it can never be adjusted downward below $350,000. Affordable housing is also exempt, so something that is going to be used for affordable housing, even if it's not the 60%, but it's going to be used for federal, state, or local affordable housing. We don't want to penalize that, even though we like 60 better than 80. We don't want to disincentivize other affordable housing options, so we're exempting that as well. First-time home buyers, where all purchasers qualify. So let's say you and your spouse purchased a piece of property. Neither of you has owned a piece of property before. You would be exempt in that transfer. If one or both of you, so say your spouse has owned property before but you have not, if you're both going to be on that deed, you're not both first-time home buyers, you would not be exempt under that particular provision. Intra-family transfers, charitable organizations like Habitat for Humanity, homeless shelter, things of that nature, that's exempt. We're not trying to disincentivize charity. So we're making an exemption for that. And Plymouth residents buying a new, but not an additional Plymouth residence. So as I said, you're already in the club. So we don't want, if you upgrade your house or you downgrade your house, depending on your life circumstances, we don't want to penalize you because you haven't left. You have to buy your new house within 8 months. So if you leave, then you're like, you know what? I went to Weymouth for a bit for some reason, and I came back because I missed it, but I've been gone for 9 months or more. Then you're paying your initiation fee again because you left the club. That's the line that we do. We think most people in most circumstances are going to buy their second house within 8 months of selling their first house. So we think most people will be covered by that. But if you're a Plymouth resident, I live in North Plymouth. Let's say I was going to buy a property on Manamet and rent it out during the summer. That's an investment property for me. So that's not exempted because that's not something that we're looking to per se incentivize, because that's actually driving up the cost of housing in Plymouth, is people doing that. So you can, if you're going to be buying an investment property, our theory is you can afford to pay a 1 to 2% fee in that circumstance. There are other exemptions as well. The exemptions, if you are a town meeting member, start on page 143 of the proposed legislation in section 11, and there's a number of details there. Exemptions only apply if it's going to be the primary residence of the individual making the purchase. So commercial property does not qualify for exemptions, other than if it were a charitable commercial type. And as I said, it has to be pursuant to all the provisions that are detailed within there. So if it's your primary residential property, you could qualify for an exemption. If it's commercial property, it would not. So the land bank is run by
So
a
because
commission.
if you go up, I mean, this $350,000,
Mm-hmm.
if it's $1 more, it's costing you.
1 to 2%. So if it costs $350,001,
So
you would
it's
pay
like,
1 to 2% on the entire price.
right.
But the land bank
So
commission
how is that
could.
debated? Because that's a real cliff. I mean, that's a reason not to go over 350. A $350,000 parcel is going to cost you $350, but a $351,000 parcel is going to cost you $7,000 more. I mean, how is that debated within the?
Sure. So the Land Bank Commission, which I'll explain in a moment, they can adjust that in January of each year. They could adjust that 350
It's
upward.
still going to be a cliff.
Whatever it would be, there has to be a bright line, and that bright line is set at a minimum of 350. But they could set it at $10 million if they wanted to do so.
So what do you mean it has to be a bright line? It can't be graded. It can't be.
Correct.
Is that part of some?
So all of the provisions that we have in here, and we'll talk about it a little later as well. Because this needs to go through the State House, we've looked at, this isn't the fourth time. So I told you earlier, there's 3 land banks in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
This is not the 4th one that has been proposed in the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
Others have been proposed and they have failed to get through the legislature for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
So we don't want to fail. So we've looked at those other situations, what caused those issues, and tried to solve them proactively in what we're proposing here.
Mm-hmm.
So we've looked at what's worked in Massachusetts, what hasn't worked in Massachusetts, as well as what has worked in other communities and other jurisdictions. And the approach that we have on this, having a bright line rather than a gradient, is part of that. There's also the fact that the more admin you put in all these exemptions and stuff, the less money you're going to have to do the actual purposes of the act. So we think just the commission will, like right now, if this was 5 years ago, $350,000 would have been the median price for houses in Plymouth. It was around that at that time. Now it's like $550,000. So now most houses, most parcels would not be under $350,000. But we're setting that at the minimum. The commission can set it again higher in January of any given year if they choose to do so, as to fluctuate the market. Because sometimes the market's up, sometimes it's down. It trends upward over time, obviously, but we wanted that level of flexibility for the commission. Speaking of the commission consists of 9 independent commissioners that are appointed by the following bodies. So there, 2 members would be appointed by the Select Board, 2 members would be appointed by town meeting through the COPC, so not by town meeting itself at a town meeting, but by the committee of precinct chairs that they're voted to be precinct chairs by town meeting members. 2 would be appointed by the Planning Board, 1 by the Affordable Housing Trust, 1 by the Open Space Committee, and 1 by the Land Use and Acquisition Committee. So these are people and entities that have interest in some or all of the purposes of the land bank. So obviously affordable housing is one of the legs, so is open space, so that affects them. Select Board has a broad amount of priorities, affordable housing, municipal use, obviously affordable housing still. Same thing with town meeting and the Planning Board. So they all have skin in the game, so to speak. So we want them to have the opportunity to make these appointments. None of these bodies may appoint any of their own members, or members, like a Select Board member can't appoint an Open Space Committee member, for example. And they can't appoint any elected official, including a town meeting member, including a selectman, including a member of the school committee. But we want it, and the reason for that is to preserve its independence as an independent land bank commission. And that is also to get it passed through the legislature. The town of Lexington has a representative town meeting. They tried to pass a land bank that had town meeting involvement, and it didn't pass. So it needs to be independent. The independent also has a benefit. The land bank, unlike other governmental entities, would be able to pay above appraised value for property. That's particularly important for something like, say, the Holtec parcel, since I can think of at least one major stakeholder with a significant amount of money in an adjacent parcel that would maybe pay significantly above appraised value for acquiring some or all of that parcel. And if we can't compete with that because of state law, that's going to really hurt us. But they can. They can also invest the funds. So say they want to put money away towards the Holtec parcel over time. the money that comes in, they could invest that money in a fund to have it grow while they're waiting for that parcel to come on the market. You can't, in a government entity, a purely government entity cannot do that. But they can do it because of their level of independence and how they're being constituted. So they are going to have more ability to leverage the funding that they're getting within those three limited spheres. So they don't have money to do whatever they want. It's municipal use, affordable housing, open space, or some combination of those three things. All right? So the land bank is structured like this, as I was just alluding to, for those reasons. If it were subject to approval by the select board, by a town meeting, by the planning board, any other government entity, any other elected official, other than having the appointment authority or removal authority, then it would be considered a part of town government in a way that would be impermissible and would not allow us, or not allow the Land Bank Commission to pay of appraised value or to invest the funds that it acquires. The land bank is special legislation, needs to be passed into law. As I said earlier, less independent versions have failed at the state level. The state is also extremely wary of proposals it views as being anti-housing. Now, there's a lot of, you've heard about MBTA communities law probably. You've heard about the push at the state level for more affordable housing in the Commonwealth. You're hearing about it in the presidential race as well. Affordable housing is not only a local issue, not only a state issue, but a national issue. All right. So we put affordable housing in this land bank to make it clear to the state who needs to pass it that we are not anti-housing. We're not anti-growth at all, in the sense of like all growth is bad. We want to leverage and control and manage that growth. Right now, private developers, private interests are making the decisions for Plymouth. The land bank is a way for Plymouth to make decisions for Plymouth. You might be asking yourself, why do we need this if we have the CPC? Or why do we need this if we have the Open Space Committee or things like that? Well, let's focus primarily on the CPC because it's the most similar. And again, a prior land bank was basically turned into the CPC at a later date. The land bank can operate outside the town meeting cycle. The Community Preservation Committee cannot. So Community Preservation Committee is limited. It has to have its funds approved by town meeting. It makes a recommendation, and town meeting has to ultimately make that decision to do it or not do it. That does limit their opportunity to get certain parcels. So say a piece of property needs to go on the market, needs to be sold by a certain amount of time by whoever owns that property. If they can't afford to wait for a town meeting, the town could lose that opportunity. Now, the town can call a special town meeting at any time, but that costs money and also has a delay to it as well. We tried to do one to buy a piece of property a few years ago, didn't end up working out. But that one was a 30-day window to call that, and it was extremely rushed. I was the chair of the Advisory and Finance Committee at the time, and it essentially ruined the month of June for me. But that was a Herculean effort to get that done. I think 45 days is probably realistically about the closest you could do it and do it right. But a lot of people can't wait in certain circumstances for 45 days to do that. This operates on a 12-month-a-year calendar, so they're not tied to that. So they can move on a piece of property when it becomes available. They don't have to wait for anyone else or anything else. The affordable housing, as I said earlier, is more affordable than that offered by the CPC. 60% AMI is better than 80% AMI, and it doesn't preclude CPC from spending its money on the 80%, but it helps address the current crisis better. And while getting more affordable housing in Plymouth sooner, you avoid things like 40Bs taking over local zoning, taking over Plymouth's ability to control its own destiny, taking over our ability to make our own decisions, and you allow the town to function the way that it wants to function and the voters actually want it to work. Municipal use purpose is also unique to this, something the CPC does not have, and again, as I said earlier, would allow the town to leverage the growth to meet the needs created by that growth. And the same thing with open space. As we continue to grow, as the aquifer becomes threatened, as open space becomes more rare because of growth, this will be able to automatically adjust to that and have the money available to buy parcels for open space for municipal use. So that is the end of my presentation, and I am available to answer questions. Yes?
Is there any exemptions for passing property down to our children or stuff? And the other exemption was if somebody's gone military service and then returns back to Plymouth, is he or she going to be penalized on that for buying their first piece of property as they return to Plymouth, but they would have had property elsewhere, I'm assuming, if they were gone 5 or 6 years or 12 years or 20 years for their service.
So there are provisions for veterans-related housing. So if a veteran were buying private housing, not veterans as a benefit, as a service benefit, and they would have to qualify for another one of the exemptions, which they may. There's multiple pages of exemptions. So it starts on 143 and it doesn't end until 148, so there's a number of them. But there are provisions for veterans services housing. There's also, your first question was in regard
About your children. If you
children.
have a house and they've gone off to college,
Right.
and you bought them a condo in their names or whatever, so they can
Yep.
the financial deal for colleges, and then now they're coming back to Plymouth, want to buy their own house. Well, they've already owned a piece of property somewhere else,
Mm-hmm.
but they've been gone for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
That would mean they'd be up for that tax fee, even though that
Sure.
Plymouth was their.
So there's a number of ways that you could make an intra-family transfer that it would be exempt. There are so you could give it as a gift. There can also, if it's a transfer by operation of law. So I used to own my house with my two parents. So when my parents died, I inherited that house, and that I would not have had to pay a transfer fee on that particular piece of property. You can also transfer land into a trust. So if you were to have estate planning, you put the house into a trust, then they're the beneficiary of the trust. There's a provision for that. So there's several different ways to plan, asset plan, estate plan, to avoid paying this fee, just like estate planning avoids paying other probate fees, other transfer fees of that nature. So we have incorporated that as a potential exemption. Okay. You're welcome.
How does the rental market fit into all of this?
Well, so the rental market, if you were building a apartment building, that'd be commercial property, so you would have to pay the transfer fee. Right now, rentals are particularly in rental buildings are very popular in Plymouth because housing is at such a shortage, so they can charge a premium. So if we have another tool to lower the cost, because increasing affordable housing stock lowers the cost of housing for everybody, not just the people getting affordable housing. So I personally think, I remember 10, 15 years ago when it was like the condification of Plymouth. Everybody was building condos. They were turning every building that was going on the market, old historic buildings, into condos. Last 10 years or so, it's been apartments because they're making more money off that than they are the condos.
Right.
But they're doing that because there's more money in it because of the scarcity of housing. So I think, as those buildings continue to be constructed, they're going to have to pay the fee. They won't be exempt. And as we put more affordable housing on with the land bank, with the CPC, also with the Affordable Housing Trust, both of which would still function,
Right.
then we can disincentivize over time people doing that. And because it will not be as profitable to have all these rentals because there is only a finite market for that. But right now, because we're not able to build the housing to compete with it in an effective way, they're making the decisions for us.
Any ideas of, like, when you talked about taxing, our services, someone that's renting is taxing the services as well, right?
Yes.
The renter.
Yep.
Is there any provision for doing something along that where there's a certain fee that comes along with that, sort of a social membership to the club?
Right. So one of the ways that we're in other jurisdictions outside the Commonwealth, you can do what's called an impact fee or an exaction. So the Commonwealth is opposed to that. So we are trying to get as close to that as we can without crossing over the line and being ruled out of order. So this doesn't allow for something like that. Current law in Massachusetts doesn't allow for something like that. But in theory, the property taxes that the owner of that apartment building, a company or an individual, are paying should be the way that they're just like, I own my house, I'm paying for the services I consume through that. So that for right now, that's the best we can do in terms of that. But there are, if that law were to change ever in the future, entities in town are interested in other types of impact fees or exactions. But it's been a long time that's been the rule of law here in the Commonwealth, that you can't impose an impact fee, so it doesn't seem likely in the near future.
Is this just for undeveloped land?
No, this is for land. So if you,
Land without structures, or land?
all land.
All land, so it
Yep.
would include buying a house, a lot with a house on it?
Yeah, if you bought a house that was built
No,
in.
I mean, but the land bank is interested in buying.
Oh, they could buy land with a house on it. So they could buy, like, just like the CPC has bought land with houses on it and turned it into open space. They could do that. They could buy land with a house on it and turn it into a fire station or a school. They could do any of those things. So the land bank could buy any parcel of land, and any parcel of land that's sold, unless it qualifies for an exemption, is subject to the transfer fee. So an existing house being sold, new construction, any of that. Jenny?
Ginny Davis, Precinct 4 rep. Who would do the oversight to this committee? Because
Sure.
it's an independent committee.
Yep.
Been appointed.
Yep.
And now, where's the oversight on it? That's
Sure.
my concern.
Okay, so let's talk about oversight. So it's an appointed group. The people that appoint can remove any member of the commission for cause, as outlined in the legislation, as well as the commission themselves can remove their own membership. Say somebody is not following the rules, is not attending, the commission could take action and remove folks themselves. Now you might ask yourself, well, wouldn't there be more protection, more oversight if they were elected as opposed to appointed? And other land banks have had elected folks on them in the past. But in Plymouth right now, it's extremely hard to remove an elected official. I've said this before, I'll throw myself under the bus again. Let's say I wake up tomorrow and I decided I'm not going to follow the charter of the town of Plymouth in my role as vice chair of the select board. I'm just going to do whatever I want. In order to remove me, you have to get a large number of signatures in a very short period of time. You need to have an election where 20% of the voters come out and vote. And the last time we tried to change the charter of the town in a townwide election, less than 16% of the town came out to vote. So, I hate to break it to you, but if you're looking to recall me, good luck. But we think it's much more fair and accessible for this oversight to be through these appointed boards, because you're going to elect your select board members, your planning board members. You're going to elect those folks. And they are appointing open space committee members. They're appointing these the LUAC folks. So there's still that Affordable Housing Trust. There's still that oversight through people that are being elected. But because it's independent, having them appointed makes it much easier to get rid of a bad actor quicker, right? So I know that people feel a little bit more comfortable if they're electing. But the other thing is, too, keep in mind, this would very much be a down ticket race for most folks. I think in townwide elections, people pay attention to the select board. But the farther you get down that ticket, the less people are paying attention. People are like, what does the planning board do exactly? School committee, what's that about? The redevelopment authority. So the land bank, people are going to be like, I don't know what that is. So I think as a practical matter, there would be very little meaningful oversight by the voters. If it were elected, I think this is a much more effective way to do it. And again, we could get rid of a bad actor or bad actors much sooner. We could also get rid of people that don't attend much sooner.
Will it be always open meetings?
Yeah, it's subject to the open meeting law. So all the meetings will be open.
Unless they were like voting on, well, sometimes they can't. They vote on prices of things.
If they're in
Like the select
negotiations, yeah, so they could have an executive session for negotiations on a piece of property,
Right,
but that would still have minutes. So just like the select board, you'd still eventually get to see that. It's just that could be subject to an executive section exemption. But yes, their meetings would be subject to the open meeting law, just like any other. Yes.
Is there any rules about the people you appoint? As you applied, could you, as selectmen and assistants and all that sort of stuff, could you appoint your niece, your nephew, and your sister and your wife to be on that board? Or is there any control from who you're putting on that board? That they have anything to do with this as opposed to family, friends, or business partners? Business partners is the worst one, in my mind.
Okay. Well, so there'd be any position, this and any other position would be subject to the state conflict of interest law. And you'd also, the most that any one group gets is 2 appointments. So there's that level of protection. I think too, if I were appointing members of my immediate family or other selectmen were doing that, or other folks, that would probably be seen as pretty unpopular pretty quickly. Would probably be very bad for those individuals in the long term. So I think there's a built-in protection there.
Well, it happens already in town, so.
Well, but right now, the unique features of this, right? So right now there's like 750, say, positions in town government, but there's only like 200 people wearing all the hats. Some people are wearing one big hat, some people are wearing 10 little hats. But it's a limited pool. But there's a provision that prevents people that are on these boards and commissions that are doing the appointment from being on it, and a provision that prevents them from being any other elected official. So you're already thinning the herd, so to speak, of eligible candidates to make it as independent as you can by that provision. I think the idea here is to have it be, even though the tendency in Plymouth is that the few people that do all the work do a lot of work individually, this is designed as closely as we could to still make it work. That if you're on a land bank commission, that's what you do when you volunteer for the town.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, this and all the provisions. Could this be in a perfect world? Are there ways we could make it type do this thing, do that, make it a little better over here? Yes, but with this, the important thing is we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. I'm not saying this is perfect. I'm not saying it solves every problem that this community has. That this is the white knight in shining armor coming over the hill right before the end. No. This is just an important tool to have that does a lot of the things that we want, that would be available to address these 3 specific ongoing, really perennial needs that the community has in a way that doesn't raise taxes on existing residents. But we need to get it passed at the State House. We need to have it be palatable to the general electorate in an election. So we can't do everything with it. It can only do some things. It can only do the things that we know that the legislature has a palate for as well. So we've tried to make it do as many of the things that we want in as many ways as we want to function for current and future needs of Plymouth. But again, we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And we think this is good, but not perfect.
Yeah.
Yes.
The CPC. So how does that fit into all of this? And,
Sure.
And at one, they were also getting money on home transfers or something like that. Right?
They get a percentage, a surcharge of your property taxes. So they don't.
Surcharge. Okay, so we
And a state match.
Okay, so we were more in control of that. That was nothing that had to go to the state house to get approval.
Oh, it did.
Oh,
Well, it was passed. The state passed the CPA, and then local communities had to adopt it, including the voters. So town meeting had to adopt it,
Right.
and the voters. So they did the same 3 steps. They just did it in reverse.
Yeah.
Because this is town, state, voters. That was state, town, meeting, voters.
So what are the differences? Like, how does that function now?
Sure.
And what does Land Bank do?
So one of the important ways is, so they have open space, CPC and Land Bank have open space. They have affordable housing, and so do we, although the affordable housing piece, they're at 80% AMI, we're at 60% AMI. And I say we as the Land Bank proposal, right? Okay. They have historical preservation. We don't have that in the Land Bank. We instead have municipal use. So there's a difference there. They are bound by the town meeting cycle. The Land Bank is not. They get their money from a surcharge on property taxes. This is by a transfer fee on transfers of interest in real estate. So everybody in this room is paying towards the CPA every year. Yeah. But once you've made a transfer, unless you make another transfer of real estate, you're not paying into this again, okay? However, having said that, although they do some of the same things, they can work together. So say Holtec, for example, because that's 1,530.35 acres. It's a big piece of property. The sooner it comes on the market, the harder it's going to be for the town to acquire it in the way we want to do it, because we're going to have less time to put money away towards it. So the Land Bank might want to partner up with the CPC for a purchase like that. Yeah. And they could do that. It would obviously then be tied into aspects of the town meeting cycle. But I think if the Holtec parcel comes on, that's a good reason to call a town meeting. A special town meeting if need be. But there's no reason the CPC can't work together on a project like acquiring Holtec. So say say the town has a $3 million credit, say only 1,000 of the 1,530.35 acres come online. It's a total purchase price of like $30 million for what is online at that time. So CPC has some money they're going to borrow. The town has some money that they're going to get through some grants, and the land bank has the rest of the money that they're going to buy. That all three of those stakeholders could combine their funds. It just has to be within the provision. So it'd have to be open space, recreation, municipal use type of purchase or affordable housing. It couldn't be to buy Holtec and turn it into like the second Mall of America or something like that, because that's not a permissible use.
And there's no worry that the state might look at this and say, well, wait a second, you're double taxing, you're hitting CPC already, and now you're saying land bank.
So no, because again, the funding mechanisms are so different. So again, we're all paying into the CPA, whether we like the CPA or whether we don't. This is only new people coming in or existing residents buying more parcels up, something like that. So it's a very different funding source. There are the differences with the what the money is used for, as I outlined, because they have historic, we don't. We have municipal use, they don't. The 60% versus the 80%, and that some of the overlap. Like we have a sole source aquifer. We and other communities have that. It's a core function, a core attribute rather, of Plymouth. It's vital that we protect that. We think we're uniquely postured to make a case that open space should be included. Similar to how open space was the justification, not water source, but the rarity of it on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard was, look, open space is at a premium here. We need another tool in the toolbox to be able to acquire open space. Affordable housing is a known crisis. We think this could be the model for other communities to seek out their own ways to use a land bank to try and address the affordable housing crisis because we're not the only community by far. We're not the only communities experiencing this. So no, I think they work in tandem. They can work in tandem, but a worst case scenario, they can work independently, separately, forever without ever crossing or conflicting. So a prospective property owner, seller rather, who wants to sell their property to the CPC could still do that. They could apply to the land bank instead. They could apply to both and take whichever offer they want. The land bank can pay of appraised value, so it might be more palatable to some. But others, there's tax benefits to the CPC too. You can titrate that over years. So it's just another tool in the toolbox to do some of the same stuff, but there's enough differences to make it important, I think, to have both, particularly given the rate that we're growing and the inability of us to control the growth unless we own the land.
Right.
So based on an average of home sales, what do you anticipate?
Sure. So we estimated based on 2022 numbers that, not counting any exemptions, because exemptions are unique and individualized, but not counting any exemptions would be about $7 million annually. CPC is bringing in $4.4 million.
A year?
A year. Now, again, that's with no exemptions. Obviously, there will be exemptions.
Right.
So, but it's impossible to go through all the transfers to do that without having the detailed information. But that would be, and that's a significant amount of money to have and to leverage towards these purposes, and we're optimistic that it'll help actually address these issues, that we're not constantly going to be playing catch up. And tying it to the growth means the more transfers that happen, the more that's going to go in. When fewer transfers happen, it'll slow down.
That's good.
As a town meeting member that has to vote on this
Mm-hmm.
on the 19th of October, when you describe it, it sounds really great.
Yep.
What I wish I could hear, just for my sake, because I just never feel like I know enough
Yep.
before I have to vote, is if there could have been a debate, with somebody that says, no, back and forth. Doesn't mean I would say, oh, these ideas aren't great, but we're not hearing anything like anybody questioning. That's all.
Okay. Well,
I don't even know who would be a good candidate to be the.
Sure. Well, I don't know either, but because it is such a great idea, I agree. But but I would say, like, some of the concerns people have is that it doesn't have direct town meeting involvement, or it doesn't have some other government entity having direct involvement. But again, I think we explained why it's important that it doesn't. Okay, but it is very important that it doesn't. And none of the tools that town meeting currently has, or that any other aspect of our government has, is going away. This is just an additional thing, something that doesn't exist, that's being added to address existing problems. Okay? And for certain things, if the land, all the land bank does is buy land or interests in land, so they can buy a deed restriction on affordable housing, they can do that. But otherwise, they can't build a fire station. They can't decide for Plymouth, we're going to build a fire station here whether you guys want it or not. They can't do that. They can buy the land to build a fire station or a DPW annex or something like that. But town meeting still has to approve funding that. So there's still oversight on a lot of the stuff that does matter. But a big cost with those projects, those capital projects, is the acquisition of that land. And this takes that off the roll.
Okay, so for instance, we've got this committee
Yep.
formed. And they've got this great idea, there's a piece of land.
Yeah.
Of course, they make the final decision, but before they do they approach the town manager and the select board saying, this has come up, to get input from those boards, or do they go off and make this decision by themselves?
So they're independent by design. So they're not required to make a decision like that. I would think if they were looking for a municipal use, they should ask the town
Well,
about
that's
that,
the thing.
right?
Where's the catch on that?
Well, the catch, so if, let's say they buy, worst case scenario, let's say they decide unilaterally they're going to buy a piece of land to build a well on. Again, we don't want a well there. Thanks, but no thanks. They can keep the land and transfer it to one of the other uses within their wheelhouse. So if they bought it for a municipal use and the town says no, they could be like, all right, well, we'll just make a majestic park there instead on open space. They could do that. Now, they shouldn't just act willy-nilly. We should appoint people to it that are going to do their due diligence and do the job well, just like we should any board or committee in the community. And I think we can manage that. And if we didn't, then we would be ultimately responsible. We could remove those people that acted in that way, like I said earlier. But for something like a municipal use, I think they would talk to the DPW would come up to them, the schools would come up to the fire. We've seen a presentation by fire about where fire stations are going to be. They can give that when those consultant reports come in. They can give them to the land bank and be like, be on the lookout for properties in this area, so that if something comes around that's close to this stuff, you can scoop it up for us. Let us know, obviously, and that way that would give them an incentive, because otherwise they're not going to know where to do anything because they're not per se experts in that stuff. Just like town meeting members or selectmen aren't per se experts in the things that they do, right? So it's about talking to the people that know what they're doing, the people that work in this, and that's what we encourage all boards and committees to do and not.
So there's a huge element of trust here.
Well, there is in everything. There's a huge element of trust in who your selectmen are, and who your planning board is, who your town meeting members are, who your president is. So yeah, there is. But there's those protections too. They only have this limited things that they can do. They have a pool of money that they're going to have, but they can only do it within one of these three things or multiples of those three things. They could be removed from malfeasance, misfeasance, non-attendance at any time, or by each other. So say there's somebody on there that's like completely disruptive in their meetings and is not following the rules. The other members of the commission can say, hey, I can't work with this person. We got to remove them and ask for somebody else, right? So there's a lot of guardrails there, but inherently, at the end of the day, yeah, there is an element of trust, but there is in many aspects of life.
And maybe there could be some kind of suggested advisory to them, like, here's the land bank. Let's just check with planning board if they've got anything coming up.
Yeah.
What's the wish list for the town?
Right.
I mean, that would be a really nice thing you can't mandate it.
Right.
Because they are independent, but as your board,
Mm-hmm.
this is what we've created you for. We would like to advise you,
Correct.
but we
Of
can't
that.
make them do anything. Right?
Yes, and they'll have the town's capital plan, which includes buildings in the near future. They'll have the ability to get reports about where wells are needed, about where they can ask, like, hey,
Yes,
could the
a wish
DPW
list.
come in? Right, exactly. They can ask that at any time, just like any board or committee can ask, hey, could we have staff support to talk about this topic?
Well, and the fact that they will be open meetings, that people from the land use and acquisition or open space or town meeting members can go and listen.
Correct,
that
and
is
speak.
critical.
Right, and
Yeah.
right,
That's oversight by us paying attention.
Right. Right.
yes.
So how does, just the mechanics of this, the committee decides to acquire a piece of property, who takes title of that and how does it go from there? So
Yep.
affordable housing, open space, municipal,
How does that work, Kevin?
Sure. So it depends on the use. So if say they're going to buy land to be a fire station, the commission buys it. They hold on to it until the town acts on whether to build the fire station or not, and then they transfer the land to the town for them because they're not going to build a fire station. They're not going to oversee a fire station. Affordable housing, it would depend on which type that it is. They can buy the land and give it to an entity to build affordable housing on it, or transfer it to an entity to do that. Or sometimes they can buy a deed restriction, so there's no transfer of the actual land, they're just buying the restriction. And then the entity that has it, that's what, like a lot of the Rick Vail projects that you see at CPC, those are deed restrictions. He still owns the property. The community just owns the CPC deed restriction. And then the open space, that could either be transferred to a Concom or entity within the community, or you could transfer the CR. The CR has to be separated from the town. They could transfer that to like a Wildlands Trust, something like that. But there's those mechanisms. This is really about acquisition of land and then putting it into those designated purposes, and that'll determine where the interest in that land is ultimately parked.
So on the open space, though, there would be a CR on the property.
They could put a CR on any property that they wanted. You don't need to put a CR to have open space, but generally that's the better practice is to do that. And if there is a CR, it just needs to be held by a third-party individual.
Conservation restriction?
Yes, it's conservation restriction. Yeah. So there's a lot of open space in the town that doesn't have a CR on it, but it's still, the trees and the squirrels don't know whether there's a piece of paper or not. Yes.
Back to family, just so I'm clear. I thought I was clear and now I'm not sure.
Okay.
If my grandson, who currently lives in Plymouth, lives with parents, wants to buy his first home, he's exempt from this, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I want to know.
Okay.
Okay, I was confused with the questions back then.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of, his question was general, which I understand, but there's a tremendous amount of ways to transfer property within a family. So we've tried to anticipate the most reasonable ones of that and put provisions in there.
He said transfer versus, he's saying purchase.
Well, that's still, that's a transfer.
No, he's saying his first purchase of the house.
If he
Yes.
lives in Plymouth.
Yes, but a transfer, any land trading, whether it's within a family or a third party, is a transfer. But if a first-time home buyer, if everybody on the deed is a first-time home buyer, then there's exemptions for them. Yes.
And once you're a member of the club,
Yep.
and you sell your house and buy a new house, you never pay into this program.
As long as you buy your new house within 8 months in Plymouth, or if you go to some other community that doesn't have a land bank, you're free to do what you like. Yep.
In other words, everybody here, they'll sell the house tomorrow and buy a new house. They'll never pay into this land bank.
Correct, unless they buy an investment property or commercial property within Plymouth.
Okay.
Then they would.
Or they go over the 8 month.
Yes, or they leave, for
Rent
whatever
for 8
reason, they
months.
rent for 9 months, and then they
Move
come.
down south and come back and buy it
Yep.
after that.
Yeah, then yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Can a land bank only buy property that's on the market, or can they approach someone who has, some prime real estate and try and handle a transaction off the market?
So they could have, there'd be no provision that would prohibit them from approaching, just like CPC can approach. They could do that too. I mean, but everything would be subject to the open meeting. They couldn't give somebody a sweet deal or something like that, So, but they could look at, and they might do that in certain circumstances for places that are particularly vulnerable for aquifer protection, places that make a great affordable housing purchase, something like that.
Okay.
Yep. Other questions? Yes.
How much property can this land bank purchase? How much can they accumulate?
As much as they can afford.
So given that all of this property will be taken off of the tax rolls,
Mm-hmm.
so you hear people say now that the town owns too much land and they
Yep.
have to get it off the tax roll.
They do say that.
Yeah,
So-
they do.
Yes. So the problem, though, is that it's kind of a people don't fully understand what drives up their costs of living in this community, and it's us. We're doing it as people like us because a residential taxpayer, tends to, on average, consume more services than they pay for in taxes. So the more of us there are, the higher your tax bill gets. So, obviously, if the land bank owns land that no one's living in, yes, it's not paying taxes, but it's also not draining services, right? Now, is that always true? No, you can own a sufficiently majestic piece of property that you are paying more in taxes than you're consuming in services. Also, different stages of life are different. Like I'm single, I don't have any kids, right? The biggest thing that drives up services is like $24,000 a year to send a kid to school. The more kids you got, the more money that's costing, right? So so I'm currently a net positive at this point in my life. Maybe that'll change. Maybe it won't. Who knows? The future's bright. But we'll have to see. But different people in different stages of their life are draining more or less. But on the average, a residential taxpayer is a drain. Commercial is the opposite. But this doesn't address commercial because it can't. Because that's impermissible, and we don't want the town to get into developing commercial real estate. That's a whole other ball of wax. But what it will do, right now, private developers are determining where people are going to live in this community, where development is going to happen, how dense it's going to be. And they're also, because of the lack of affordable housing, when we try and determine where we want things to go, we don't even get to do that. Because we can something like the Oasis behind Home Depot that's on formerly commercial land, they can just be like, nope, never mind, high density residential instead. So that's not great. So we want this tool to directly and indirectly be able to manage where this town grows, to direct that. The town is going to continue to grow. We've been here for 404 years and we're still building, right? Which is impressive in some regards, but also disquieting in some others. But we can direct that growth to places that have infrastructure already so that it's less of a net drain because it's where there's already support for that, right? And we can improve the quality of life for current and future generations of Plymouthians through this in a way that we cannot otherwise. So yes, it would take stuff off the tax rolls, but it would create a public benefit and address public issues, be that municipal use, affordable housing, or increasing open space or aquifer protection. Jay?
I think as I sit here,
Yes.
the thing that makes me realize this is a really creative thing is that it's not overwhelming. It still has to go to the state.
It does.
It has to be approved. And then it has to come back to us as townspeople. It will give us all that time to continue studying it before we have to vote as a town. So I was not happy about it, but the more I think about it, it's an option, it's creative. If 2 years from now we're going, no, something's occurred. But it gives you a window to learn more about it.
It does.
It's really important.
Yes. And again, it doesn't take away from anything we have now. It's just an additional thing. So if you like the CPC, you want to see that continue, great, so do we. If you like town meeting, you want to see that continue, great, so do we. For a bit at least.
No.
But so we're not taking away any of that stuff with this. All we're doing is improving Plymouth's ability to compete with the people that are currently making our decisions for us.
The developers.
Right.
The developers, the private companies, a lot of them that don't even live here, that come here to build their project, make their money, and leave. And then we're stuck.
Yeah.
We're stuck with their decisions forever.
Yeah.
And this allows us to start taking control. And the people that are paying into it are the new folks who, yeah, they're going to pay their fee, but then they're going to be part of the club and they're going to start reaping the benefits. We've already paid in, so we don't need to, with our taxes, living here for years, so it's different.
How long have your committee been working on this?
So we've been our group that's been working on this. It started with myself, Steve Bolton, and Harry Helm. Harry Helm has since moved to Maryland, and Dave Golden has taken his seat on the select board as well as his role in working on this with us. So we've been working on it for about a year, a little over a year, trying to work out the proposed legislation language, look at other legislation efforts that have failed and passed.
Is some of it driven by the future of Holtec property? I mean, because that's everybody's.
Well, it's the biggest piece of undeveloped land in Plymouth. I think it's very important to have Plymouth have a seat at the table about what happens at Holtec.
Yeah.
I think Holtec, though, in a more broad sense, not just limited to this, Holtec is a great opportunity for us to get our house in order. Similar to when I started getting involved in town in 2014, we were at that time talking about 2020, how great 2020 was going to be, what was going to happen, all the stuff. And obviously that didn't work out quite the way we planned. But for years, we were using the 2020 celebration as an excuse to do things we should have done anyways. But it was like something to focus on. People are very fickle sometimes, and long-term planning is tough. But if you have a goal in mind, it's a good opportunity to get something done that, you know, at the end of the day, worst comes to worst, yeah, 2020 didn't work out, but the town's better off for the things that we did to prepare for. Whole Tech is a great opportunity to get our financial house in order, to start looking at innovative solutions like this to address some existing issues, and to just start having more conversations about planning for Plymouth's future. You're seeing it reflected in the master plan for the community. We're in the process of trying to engage with a group to do the master planning on the Whole Tech parcel, as was alluded to earlier in the meeting. So we think, yes, Whole Tech is a significant motivator, but it's certainly not the only motivator.
Right, no.
Yeah, like 40B continues to put its boot on our neck. We know we need new fire stations in schools in the near future. That we might need a new police station or an additional police station. And it's only going to continue. We're seeing 750 to 1,000 people move into this community every year. So even without Whole Tech, there'd be good reasons to do this, but Whole Tech is a great reason to do this.
So the question on the 40B is, and you're saying you're moving from 80 to 60, and it has something to do with that, I think, as far as that?
So 40B only has to be 80.
Okay, but,
Yeah.
but is there, you know, are we trying to go to the state and say, wait a second, you know, we can't deal with an 80% level, right? Because of the aquifer, the dam of the aquifer, and all that kind of stuff. You know, is that a battle that Fernandez or somebody else or wins the election is going to take up to the state house? Or I mean, what does the town do for that? You know what I mean? Like, how do we change that?
Well,
because we're getting screwed.
Yes,
So,
well, we are, yes.
Yeah.
So 40B has been on the books for years and years and years. It's very popular with the real estate lobbying industry. I would love it if they repealed it or changed it in ways that were more beneficial to Plymouth. But the odds of them doing that anytime soon are extremely low because they have had decades to do it and they never have.
Yeah.
If they were ever to change it, that would be great. But the fact is, even if that were to change, as it relates to the land bank, we'd still need affordable housing because it's a necessary service. But you know, if there's ever any appetite on Beacon Hill to change 40B, the town would be at that table right away.
Yeah, okay.
Can we give a quick primer on the challenges of 40B, what it, in a sense, does? Because maybe everybody knows it, but I thought it might be.
Sure. So 40B is a provision in Massachusetts general law that if you don't have 10% of your housing stock classified as affordable, which is 80% or better area median income, you're subject to a 40B development. A 40B development can override local zoning. So you can have it's a high density residential. It can be high density residential in land that you zoned as light industrial, or you zoned as a community as commercial, or that you zoned as lower density residential. It can go where it's properly zoned, but it often does not. It is involuntary. Only a percentage, 20 to 25% of the units have to actually be affordable. The others can be market rate. So it is sort of the nuclear option for housing. If the community doesn't do it itself, then this is the solution that the state forces on communities. Last time I checked, which a couple months ago, we were at 6.8%. So and there's a big gap between 6.8 and 10. It doesn't seem like a big number, but there's a lot of units there. And the problem, like when a new multifamily development is multi-unit development is being proposed, the town makes that development have a certain number that are affordable to increase our SHI, or subsidized housing inventory stock, which is the relevant percentage. But what's really killing us, and there's no way to really solve it, is like when people are building single-family homes, there's no way to make a single-family home 10% affordable. So those in the aggregate are killing us over time, and it's a constantly moving target, and these projects take years to come online. So it's very complicated, and it's very challenging, and it's very frustrating. And it directs drains on services in areas we don't want.
And the aquifer.
And all the other things that high density residential cause.
If I'm correct, also mobile homes are not accountable for that percentage.
Yes, mobile homes or manufactured homes, as they're sometimes marketed, yes, they do not count, which is frustrating because if they could count, then Plymouth would be much closer to 10%.
Why is that?
Yeah, why
And
is
can
that?
we change that?
The state could change 40B anytime they want.
But also
They-
not ruling.
They choose not to because it benefits the real estate industry. So real estate lobbyists don't make a lot of money off manufactured homes. They make money off new construction. So,
So we need better lobbyists on the other side up there.
well, that's one
Have you
way.
ever thought of being a lobbyist?
I
He wasn't going to the dark side. Don't tempt him.
I
It's a good
have,
one
yeah.
on the other side.
I mean, maybe we'll see. But if this whole selectman thing doesn't work out, but for the time being, for the time being, I'm good where I am. But yeah, it is something that the town could change, but that's not something we can control. So we're trying to make a proposal that we can control. So if something like that changes up there and improves things down here, great. But there'd still be a need for this because there's still those existing other issues, municipal use and open space at a minimum. Affordable housing is still a service we need to provide. But yeah, it would be nice if we could look at things like 40Bs because we have mobile home parks. We have several of them, But that's not allowed right now. Yeah.
Just a couple of questions. One is, how long is the terms for the appointees? Or
The overlapping terms, I think it's 3 years.
it's okay if you don't have the.
I think it's 3 years. Yeah.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And AMI, what is the number? Because we talked about 80% of that number and 60% of the number, and I know when grouped into Cambridge, but what is that median income number?
Well, the monthly rate, the monthly rent for it is about $2,500 for like a 1-bedroom, and it goes up from there at higher rates. So it's just not workable.
It's Cambridge.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
All right, we're a little bit over. It was good.
Thank you.
This
Thank
has
you
been
very
great.
much.
Very good. Kevin, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all the questions and your attention. Thank you.